But first, Jim Chalmers, the man who's going to be our new Treasurer if Labor wins next month's election. He gave a big speech to the National Press Club today. Well, I say it was a big speech. It was big in length, perhaps, but small in detail. We're still not much wiser about what a Labor government would actually do. But we do now know a couple of things that Labor says, at least says, it won't do. And this is important because if you trust what Jim Chalmers said today, even as a Conservative, you would be relieved. And if you don't trust what Chalmers promised today, well, the Liberals have just been given a stick to beat Labor for the next few years, if it wins power. And it all comes down to trust, really. Now, one thing Chalmers said today, no new taxes under Labor. No new taxes apart from some on multinationals.
Our measures on multinational tax will be beyond what the government proposed in the budget. In terms of other tax measures, I think we've all made it clear, especially in the last couple of days, that we're not going to this election with other proposals on tax beyond multinationals. You know, we've said there might be a conversation with states after the election, but we're going to this election with a proposal on multinationals and nothing beyond that.
That is a huge change from what Labor was promising at the last election. People like Chalmers himself. All sorts of taxes then. That was the solution to our trouble. Now, no new taxes. Well, go figure. So either Labor is telling the truth on taxes, and this is good news, or it will break this promise after the election, just like Julia Gillard broke hers at the last election that Labor won.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
Now, breaking that particular promise destroyed the Gillard government. Breaking Chalmers' promise, it's going to destroy the next Labor government. And then there was another promise or statement from Chalmers today that, again, sounds good even to Conservatives, if you can believe it. Now, there is no doubt that, this Labor government, last one before that, the Turnbull one, they've spent too much and they've wasted too much. And it's been terrible. I mean, more than $5 billion wasted just on the deal to buy French submarines. That dumb deal by the Turnbull government that was then scrapped by the Morrison government. $5 billion for nothing. So Chalmers today dared to make this vow.
And to paraphrase another Queenslander, I say this to Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg. This reckless rorting and wasteful spending must stop.
I say he dared to make that vow because the other Queenslander that Chalmers was paraphrasing was Kevin Rudd, who made exactly that same promise in 2007 in that election campaign to become the Labor Prime Minister. He said, I am saying loud and clear that this sort of reckless spending must stop, a claim that he backed up with campaign ads.
A number of people have described me as an economic conservative. When it comes to public finance, it's a badge I wear with pride.
Now, just why Jim Chalmers quoted Kevin Rudd is actually beyond me, because we all know that Kevin Rudd broke that promise. This reckless spending must stop. Reckless? He broke that promise the minute he became Prime Minister. He recklessly plunged the country into debt, and no government since has delivered a budget that earned more than it spent. Now, Chalmers' promise reminds us that, and reminds us again, I mean, how many reminders do you need, that Labor's a terrible record here. Because what it says before an election on taxes and spending tends not to be what past governments have done, Labor governments, after the election. Before the election, Labor promises to be like a Liberal government, tight with the money. After the election, though, it's a Labor party on borrowed money. So, will Labor under Anthony Albanese, the most left-wing Labor leader in decades, be any better? To be fair, no one can know. No one can know. Maybe it will, except for this. Albanese's big campaign promise just last week, lasted precisely 4 days. 4 days before it fell over. This is extraordinary. Last Thursday, Anthony Albanese gave his live on TV speech, his big moment in front of the cameras, his reply to the government's budget. He used it to unveil his huge new policy on aged care, a couple of $2 billion worth, with this key promise.
Under a Labor government, every aged care facility will be required to have a registered, qualified nurse on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mr. Speaker, we are going to put the nurses back into nursing homes.
Oh, great line. That's a great line. The trouble with that promise, though, is that this country is already short of nurses. Remember, Daniel Andrews in Victoria was going to have 4,000 new ICU beds and then couldn't stump up the money and find the staff. Well, where is Albanese going to find a lot more of these nurses when we're already short of them? The Morrison government, that's already struggling to find the 14,000 extra aged care nurses that it wants by next year to meet its own promise to have nurses on site in aged care homes for 16 hours a day. Here comes Albanese saying he wants them for 24 hours a day. And just 4 days after that big promise, his Shadow Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, was already forced on radio to row it back.
If it is in fact true that there are not enough nurses in Australia to provide that level of care, we should train more. And it might
only got a year to do it, though.
Well, it might be that it turns out we've got to pause it.
A Labor promise with an asterisk, unless reality intrudes. Labor then had to put out a disclaimer saying, whoops, that promise comes with a flexibility in case there aren't enough staff after all. So that one promise, last week, a centrepiece promise of a big set speech by Anthony Albanese, lasted just 4 days of contact with reality. And we're now supposed to believe that Labor will not increase taxes for 3 years if it wins government, and it won't splash the cash like it used to either. Cross its heart. What a big call.